Welcome back, guys, to another episode of CoinSpice. I'm your host for this episode, Ross, or English Investor. Make sure you also check out my channel. But in this episode, I want to talk about why developing countries are probably where humanity can benefit the most when it comes to cryptocurrencies, at least when you compare the benefits to the Western world or already developed countries. I'm going to discuss some really interesting facts in this episode, so make sure you stay tuned till the end. And I want to get started with this article, which I think a lot of people now know around the world. And this was a study done by the UCL, which is a university in England. And the researchers found that the parts of the brain that are triggered by financial losses are also similar to the parts of the brain that are involved in real pain, real physical pain. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because I personally believe that the easiest way to undergo financial loss in modern economies is through inflation. And if we look at the inflation rates of countries around the world, then you will notice a definite pattern. You will notice something that's quite obvious. It's always the underdeveloped or the developing countries that have the highest rates of inflation around the world. So if you look at Venezuela, for example, it has around 450,000% of inflation. That's sort of mind-boggling. And I personally can't even imagine what it's like living in the country of Venezuela and using the government-issued currency, which you know is going to make you poor every single day. I mean, forget days, it's making you poor every single minute with this inflation rate. But if you also look at the other countries that top this list, all of these countries seem to be developing countries. They seem to be countries that do not have very sophisticated financial systems like those in the West. They don't have strong banks. They are countries that have either undergone revolutions like Libya and Egypt, or countries like Iran that have US sanctions against them. So in this article by Cointelegraph, it says that the peak inflation rate reached 10 million%. We already know that a lot of people living in Venezuela have already benefited from using Bitcoin to trade, using Bitcoin to buy things from overseas countries, because once again, the US has placed sanctions on Venezuela, which means that the people of Venezuela can't trade with the US and can't use the US dollar. So a lot of people in the country of Venezuela have actually started using Bitcoin since the past few years. They've used other cryptocurrencies as well. And even if they chose cryptocurrencies that have actually lost value, it has still been significantly, considerably better than using the government-issued Venezuelan bolivar. And you may have read all of these articles that have shown how people are mining Bitcoin themselves or going to other people that have Bitcoin from overseas countries and how they're buying it from one another. Localbitcoins.com is one such place where a lot of people have gone to in Venezuela to buy Bitcoins from other people, because of course there are no sophisticated exchanges located in Venezuela, and even if there are, they're most likely not going to be accepting the Venezuelan bolivar. So people have had to flock to either going back to a barter system, which is sort of caveman style, or switch to a better currency, a better international digital currency. And just to continue painting this picture, if you look at the world map of where Bitcoin is either legalized or where it's just allowed to be bought or sold, or allowed to be mined and other activities are allowed, then you will notice once again that it's the underdeveloped countries, it's the developing countries that seem to be banning Bitcoin and not really accepting it as a means of payment. And like the Reserve Bank of India has mentioned, it doesn't recognize any currency and it doesn't want any bank in the country to recognize Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency as legal tender, as official currency, or as even any currency. And similarly, if you look in other developing countries around the world, then they have either banned it or they have put severe restrictions on buying and selling Bitcoin that has negatively influenced the industry in that country. And if we look at banking in these developing countries, then they happen to not be as sophisticated as countries in the West. And if we look at India as an example, then banking in India is relatively expensive. People have to actually pay to open bank accounts, and these are called maintenance fees. You may have seen this in your country, but in the UK, bank fees are non-existent. We don't have to pay money to open bank accounts. In fact, banks in the West pay us to open bank accounts. And ATM fees in the UK have been eradicated. Businesses can't charge you for using cards for payments anymore. When you live in a Western sheltered society, it's difficult to notice these problems that the rest of the world faces on a daily basis, and myself included. We get used to having a sophisticated financial system. And if we take HSBC India as an example, then you have to pay an annual fee of 150 rupees, but there are also other fees. And if you're going to send money abroad, then there's a 3.5% currency conversion markup. A lot of Indian debit Visa cards are routinely marked with valid in India and Nepal only, due to the country's restrictive foreign exchange reserve policy. So it's sort of like having funfair vouchers that you can only spend in that funfair, or casino coins that you can only spend in that casino, and all is good when you're spending time in that casino, when you live in that casino or funfair. But as soon as you leave that system, your vouchers or your shitcoin tokens are worth absolutely nothing. And once again, this is one more reason why developing countries may be a hub for cryptocurrency innovations in the next bull market, and why we're probably yet to see a lot of developments in the developing markets. And I also want to bring this page up. It was updated recently, and if you look at the top 10 biggest banks in the world, you've got China, UK, America, this is French, you've got Japanese, America, and French again. So you will see a lot of the biggest banks in the world are located in a few bunch of countries, specifically the biggest economies of the world. And when it comes to developing countries, they might not have sophisticated banks, they might not have big banks, they might not have any banks that actually work. And a lot of developing countries might have high bank failure rates, high default rates, which is the reason why these banks do not become that big. And one more reason why it's possible that you can lose a lot of money if you hold bank accounts in developing countries. So financial loss from the closure of banks, from banks going bust, is a real thing. It's something we don't often see in the West, but I assure you it is a real thing, and it does happen in developing countries more often than you might think. So when it comes to developing countries, there is really a need for a system that does work, that you know can guarantee to work. That when you send money to somebody, that other person knows that they can do something with that money, and it's not just a funfair voucher that is only usable in that country, or that might have a massive inflation rate of 10% or so. And a couple of years ago, this article showed that over $5 trillion are spent using mobile payments in China alone. So definitely a massive demand for usable money, more convenient money when it comes to developing economies of the world. But what actually happened is that most people have started using WeChat Pay and Alipay in China. And what happens as a result of this is things like this. Now China wants to track and grade each citizen's actions, and it's in the testing phase already. So this is an article that was published recently. And of course, these things are possible when you have a few centralized systems where the government can actually monitor everything that you're doing, everything that you spend money on, and where you're getting your money from, where it goes to, how good of an investor you are. And at the end of the day, the government can hit the delete button on you if it doesn't like you. It can basically throw you out of the country, and all of your money will be worth absolutely nothing because your money is controlled by a few centralized institutions. So this is not a problem in the West as of yet, but of course we need to see how popular Facebook's Libra coin becomes in the West. Then of course things may quickly change in the West as well. But for now, I'm going to assume this is not going to happen in the West. People are more conscious of privacy in the West right now, especially with recent events happening with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, Panama Papers, and all of these leaks show people what can happen when you have centralized sources of information storing all of your financial data, and what happens when all of this data gets leaked. So this video was just to highlight that even in 2019, developing countries face issues that they no longer have to face, especially with the advent of cryptocurrencies. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you hit the like button and the subscribe button, and make sure you also subscribe to my channel, English Investor. Thanks a lot for watching, and have a nice day.